The Splatoon series is a shining example of how Nintendo can still innovate in the modern era. That is, if you ignore that it's going to turn a decade old this year. Splatoon 1 was given its roses, however, I don't believe everyone truly understands how lucky you were to have played this game in its prime. Say what you will about the Wii U and its underperforming ass and how you had no friends if you owned one, but looking back now, I think owners of the system were more lucky than some of us give credit for. And I promise I'm not coping. There's a lot of strong exclusives that will unfortunately be stranded on the console, and the ones that made heavy use of the gamepad will likely never see the light of day without a gutted port. Splatoon 1 was one of those gems, and yeah, while you can't experience it in its peak anymore, or well, experience it at all through official means, it was a breath of fresh air in terms of movement and design for a done-to-death genre. While Splatoon 2 was a little less special in that regard, as it had to sacrifice the unique quirks that came from the Wii U's gamepad in favor of a traditional control scheme, it made up for that through the introduction of new mechanics, weapon types, an all-new Horde mode, and a bunch of fucking horseshit specials. And because the Switch had more than 2 units sold, I now had actual friends to play this multiplayer shooter with, and I could enjoy this series to its fullest extent. That's not even talking about how, despite being multiplayer focused, the sequel took stride in building upon the world of the series in ways that the player base actually ended up influencing through in-game events. The post-launch support for this one was even stronger, to the point that it could have lasted the Switch's entire lifespan. There are more weapons in this game than there are residents in Alaska, and that's not even covering Octo Expansion, which I've talked about before, a great DLC expansion. But even then, I can acknowledge that there are a lot of changes you just can't feasibly make with a couple of updates alone. So for the latter portion of the console's runtime, we'd be provided with an unexpected new chapter. Splatoon 3's announcement came as a surprise to anyone with common sense because, well, we thought Splatoon 2 would last for the rest of the console generation. I mean, heck, I remember when that game came out, there were folks wondering if that was a necessary sequel despite it being on a whole new system. But I was still very open to the idea of a new Splatoon game because I think it was a good opportunity to get a fresh start. I'd made a lot of good memories with the series thus far, and there was still a lot of brand new stuff to experience. I had a lot more friends I could play with now. I never got that into the competitive side, so I could dip my toes into that. What new story could be told? Will the online be good? Like that's ever gonna happen. For a true last outing for the generation, Splatoon 3 was shaping up to be the ultimate culmination of everything the series has been building towards till that point, and would certainly prove its worth. What even is Splatoon 3's reputation? It's strange, really, that a series I began to associate so much with Nintendo's present-day image has a new release that didn't make the waves that it feels like it should have. It reviewed well, and it sold great. I mean, Nintendo could put used tissue in a Switch case and it'd sell 1 million copies if it had their seal of quality on it. In fact, that's essentially what they're doing now with the Switch 2 game keycard thing. Other than that, though, I literally don't hear anyone talk about this game anymore aside from the core fanbase. That's bound to happen for any multiplayer-focused game, but I definitely remember there being a lot more fanfare surrounding the first 2 games, and that's more than likely due to the period in which they were released. The first coming out in the latter half of a failing console's lifespan, almost being like a beacon of hope, and the second being present from the beginning of a new flourishing one. Meanwhile, our third entry is awkwardly plopped into the midpoint of the same system after the company producing it has staked a claim into the industry once again. And while it's still a very well-received game, I also feel like it's the one that's gotten the most negative attention, in part due to its seemingly redundant nature, some of the decisions regarding the game's balance, the adjustments to the content release schedule, among numerous other points of contention. As someone who grew up alongside this series during my early teens, this game had a lot to live up to, and it's probably been the last thing Nintendo released that I earnestly cared about. It's an incredibly interesting mix of everything the devs have learned alongside the worst aspects of the company these days, and it's just a freaking weird mixed package that I haven't been able to settle my feelings on. One of the most exciting things going into Splatoon 3 was the change in scenery. I think an underrated element of this series that extends beyond the core gameplay is how the world itself has evolved over time. Through the transition between Splatoon 1 and 2, you got to see how some of the characters have changed and how the old shopkeepers are up to new things. By the time we got to Octo Expansion, we witnessed Octolings getting integrated into the society of Inkopolis, and that's cooler for more reasons than just getting to play as them. I mean, with only 2 hair options, of course I'm not going to play as this idiot. What matters though is seeing how things are progressing, and at this point, it's something you might not even acknowledge. Like, I've surprised some people by telling them that Shiver is an Octoling. It's just that natural, as it should be. The world itself has also undergone a big makeover, with the influence of the Chaos vs. Order Splatfest from the end of Splatoon 2 bleeding into our new environment. While I'm disappointed that the Wasteland isn't as prevalent outside of Scorch Gorge, I guess, and the opening to story mode, Splatsville is a showcase of that theme itself. It's a far bigger and bustling location than the former hubs, with mesmerizing buildings and streets stretching out all across the place. I know this isn't something a lot of people pay much mind to, but as someone who's liked to explore hub areas like this ever since I was a kid, I appreciate the amount of detail that went into designing a location representative of the world's evolution that'll unfortunately get ignored by a lot of the player base. Barring those who like to use it as a faux Miiverse, of course, so it's doubly good as a social center as well. And of course, need I mention one of the best additions, finally being able to skip the stage rotation announcements so you can just jump straight into the swing of things. And really, I think that the fact that it took 7 years for them to give you this option is a better representation of how much things have changed than anything else I've listed off. But anyway, on to stuff you actually care about. Innovation is deemed a necessity when it comes to sequels, and while I do agree with that notion, as I like multiple games in a series to be easily distinguishable from each other, the balance between retaining the old and adding new gets much more blurry when it comes to the multiplayer shooter genre. Splatoon, already having one entry on the Switch, left the bigger shoes to be filled when 3 was rolling around. We've been through this discussion before when the transition between Splatoon 1 and 2 was occurring, and it only seems to be more prevalent here. Just like that game, however, Splatoon 3 isn't just the same game repackaged with more content. It's the same game repackaged with less content. It's an opportunity to completely overhaul everything in a way that would be too big in scale and unnatural to implement through an update for 2. Considering the new movement options through squid rolling and surging, haphazardly applying that to a game that had existed for 5 years at the time of this entry's release would be like if they randomly patched in wave dashing into Smash Ultimate. Like, please, you think that game would ever have any actually cool tech? Maneuverability has always been a fun aspect of Splatoon's gameplay that made it stick out amongst its contemporaries, and further emphasized area control to give you as much freedom when moving around your environment. Squid rolling to deflect a bit of oncoming damage is a neat addition, if not always applicable, but what I found myself particularly enjoying about the technique is just being able to cut corners ever so quicker to get to where I need without slowing down my momentum. As someone who's constantly trying to optimize movement in any game I can, I think it's a welcome add-on to the core moveset that increases the skill ceiling beyond the core shooting. Surging, on the other hand, I don't find myself using as much, and I can admit that's partially a me thing, as I think it's less useful for jumping up walls like it's advertised to do, and more helpful to keep your position on a wall without sliding down. More importantly though, you can now play Pong in the lobby. The effectiveness of those two abilities are also closely tied to the bloom on applicable weapons. All 3 of these are affected by the new equipment ability Action Up. If you're playing a weapon with a lot of bloom, you're also going to have to pump your gear with this good stuff, because the more you have, the less the bloom expands when you jump. To someone unaware of this shooter lingo, this essentially patches up the weakness of weapons that suffered from poor jump accuracy, such as the range blaster. What was once a cool weapon that also had a mind of its own when you weren't planted on the ground is now really fucking annoying in tower control. As for the weapon selection, that's where things get a lot more hit and miss. The Stringer, being the poster child for all that was new on offer, it came under a lot of scrutiny due to its playstyle. The Tri-Stringer, at least, is supposed to serve as an anchor, much like the Charger and Splatlings, with a stronger focus on area denial, further emphasized by its Toxic Mist and Killer Whale. It's essentially a brand new chat command that screams, "Stop playing tower control." I bring up the tower because that thing is a giant beacon asking to get flooded with all the shit Tri-Stringer can throw at it, otherwise the thing is kinda difficult to understand how to utilize properly. I mean, let's face it, if you can't paint well or defend yourself in a one-on-one, then the casual player base is more than likely going to write you off. Not helping is that this class only has 2 other archetypes, one of which being the later added Wellstring, which I see being used far more often in comparison due to its higher projectile count, and the Reflex, which was available at launch, trading off the exploding projectiles in favor of being able to hold its charge when you go into squid form, and therefore serving as a more offensive variant. That is, if Splatoon players were actually good at this game and didn't just use it for Tenta-missile spam. Yeah, there's a whole debate surrounding the weapons kit thing, and it's something I'll come back to later, but it does end up gutting a lot of weapon types. I thought that the Splatana Wiper looked like it should be wiping my ass at first. I didn't really see the pros of this thing at all whenever it was first revealed. I got a chance to use it during the Testfire Splatfest, and I was firm in my belief that I think the Splatana Wiper sucks! And then I got my taste of Stockholm Syndrome. In my old retrospective, I stated that the L3 nozzle nose was my favorite weapon in 2, so it might be surprising to learn that I don't really gaff about it anymore. Keep in mind, whenever I said that, I was still pretty casual. This is the first game in the series where I genuinely grinded ranked and learned how to play as well as someone with roughly 200 hours could. And the wiper was my gateway. What it lacks in raw damage, it makes up for in maneuverability. Funny thing to mention, this thing didn't used to paint a straight line with its horizontal strings, just little awkward droplets. It quickly got a buff to where both the horizontal and vertical swings paint clean lines, not only letting you get around much quicker, but also greatly improving its paint output. It gives it a fun skirmisher playstyle where, while it may not be as effective in head-on battles as, say, a shooter, it's just as easy to get into a fight as it is to escape from one. But let's not kid ourselves, I don't like this thing for its utility, I like it for its dumb shit.
I swear if we lose now.
No, just get on the tower and then overtime will be over.
Easier said than done.
They're pushing us back.
Fuck up! I got him!
We got it.
We scored a cliff,
I'm
boys.
literally about to hit a cliff.
I literally hit a cliff. I
Hey
killed...
Tyler, can you just get better shoes?
The vertical swing has an insta-kill hitbox if you hit someone with it from point blank, and this is what dreams are made of. With that kind of sound design, it's like the Spy's backstab in TF2, but dare I say even more gratifying in the ways you can catch someone with one of these. Whether it's a super jump landing gift or granting a callout so nasty that even environmental services won't know what happened, it's endlessly satisfying when I'm not sucking dick. The torpedo's a little distractionary tool, one of my favorite subs, and shout out to Day 1 Ultra Stamp, which forgot to bring its hitbox with it when it was migrating to this game. So it's really just a free paint refill that might occasionally net you a funny clip. The complete overhaul of the sub and special system was what I was really looking forward to, and I feel like for the most part they delivered. Splatoon 2 incorporated some good ideas into its special design, but for the longest time I kind of failed to see how most of these fell flat, and under a more critical eye I can see that some of these weren't really healthy for the metagame they were trying to craft. Now don't get me wrong, I respect the gall you gotta have to put an infinite ranged laser beam in your team shooter, but unfortunately, if I want to be seen as a good judge of game design, I'm gonna have to say that this is bad. 3's philosophy leans into requiring higher skill, but providing higher reward, provided that we're not talking about pre-patched Tinta missiles, which if you didn't know, you used to be able to recharge its special gauge right after you fired one batch, instead of how it works now where you have to wait for the gauge to fully deplete before you can start building it back up again. Back to the reflex example, this was supposed to be an offensive counterpart to its brothers when all people really cared about with this thing was Obamaing up the battlefield. Speaking of Obama, Triple Ink Strike is one of my favorites because it's an effective area denial tool that's also not too overbearing since it's not as omnipresent as something like Booyah Bomb, and also leaves the player using it completely defenseless until they've dropped all of the markers. Wavebreaker is always a welcome special to have, and it's a very nice decoration for tower control. It repeatedly sends out damaging shockwaves that can mark opponents, and on top of that, it actually requires people to use the jump button to avoid these. It seems like targeted harassment for dualies players, and I for one am okay with bullying in this one instance. You know what isn't nice targeted harassment though? Fucking splatter screen. So this was a post-launch special that shoots out this giant wall that when touched gives your opponent tinnitus and helps them relate with their dog. Rather than being able to break the sound barrier though, you're just hit with a bunch of sensory overload on top of the chaos occurring at the moment. They had to patch this one out of concerns of the sudden change in brightness hurting people's eyes, but even now this special bothers me. I get disorientation is a common way to hinder players in a competitive environment, but this goes beyond a simple annoyance and actually bothers my ears. There was a lot of debate surrounding this special at first, and while it may seem strange to get worked up what may appear to be an ultimately okay special with an annoying effect, it's important to recognize how people perceive stuff like this in different ways, so now this special's just stuck in an awkward limbo where it's either too weak to actually be effective, but if it was too strong it could impair people from playing their game. But I'm not even gonna lie, it's endlessly hilarious that a game with themes of inclusivity has a special like this. Reef Slider... Man, I hate this bitch, and I don't really use it myself because I don't play weapons with it equipped. I have the misfortune of being on the receiving end of it. It's like a better Splashdown from 2, a notoriously ass panic button special that has a lot more range and safer applications in battle due to being able to launch itself out of nowhere and onto, say, a splat zone, immediately claiming it under some circumstances. If there's one great thing about it though, the name sounds like something Vector from Despicable Me would invent. So anytime one of my friends uses it, we get to go, "Beast Fighter, oh yeah! However, I'm more of a fan of Zipcaster, oh yeah! I initially mistook this for a new sub-weapon, which, now that I think about it, that would be really busted, but no, this is in fact a special. It's certainly not as devastating as other specials can be in the right hands, because it's not something you deploy, or a big weapon you bust out for a few seconds. It's instead a temporary extension of your current abilities at the cost of your sub. Zipcaster can grant you access to what may otherwise be inaccessible spots to your team, or anyone in general, and it encourages you to think outside the box to reach vantage points and either take the enemy's attention off the rest of your team and onto you, or get yourself into a position to flank and shred through them. I'm admittedly not the best at using this special myself because it requires you to be a strong offensive player, and I've got such bad aim at times that I can't even hit big targets such as your mom. But sometimes my brain turns on, I lock in, and I go flying all over the place and start shredding like these guys are cheese who are getting cheesed. It may not turn tides, but in the right hands, it's the coolest thing ever. Guess who just got a call to make the Horrorboros smile? Salmon Run is still God's greatest gift to mankind, so our fan-favorite horde mode has seen a number of natural improvements. For one, I don't know how I ever lived without something like the egg toss. At the cost of a large sum of ink, it adds a previously unseen layer of coordination between your teammates as it can lead you to create lines to toss a giant cluster of eggs back to the basket, provided you've been blessed with a non-solo queue team. It really further feeds into the feeling that you're working in the Splatoon equivalent of an Amazon warehouse. Aside from that, the new events are very uncharacteristically quaint. I mean, while these are changes of pace, they don't really add the same layer of panic as the ones introduced previously did. Sure, Glowflies is still here if you've got some remaining intestines you want to give up, but there's really nothing new added that's quite like that. Though that is made up for in a number of ways. What's actually noteworthy is the brand new Executive VP rank, which lies beyond the former highest rank of Professional. This is genuinely really hard to achieve if you have a job. I feel like Professional was manageable if you were of a moderate skill level, but when you start climbing towards Executive on the other hand, they start spreading their cheeks and filling yours with salmon up the wazoo. You thought Flyfish was bad? I mean, he is, but try having more than one big shot on the field at once. This is the type of nonsense that puts Bowser in the sky to great shame. I mean, aside from that, the rest of the new bosses like Slammin' are essentially free eggs, and Flipper Flopper is just casually approaching your base. It's like he's trying to deliver them to you. Managing to survive the murderous onslaught of fish can grant you with a potential bonus round against the sweet horrors beyond our comprehension. The King Salmonids require some crazy coordination to beat, and I can only count the amount I've defeated on one hand, but I greatly appreciate the challenge. So you have a little under 2 minutes to kill this insane boss that can't be beaten with brute force alone. The whole team has to cover some ground and destroy other boss Salmonids in order to gather their eggs and fire it back towards the king to deal extra damage. My only real issue with the King Salmonids, aside from there only being one for several months, more on that later, it's that you hardly get a chance to fight these things. Everyone in the lobby has a gauge that fills up as you do more matches. The fuller the gauge, the more likely you are to get a bonus round, and when maxed, it's a guaranteed chance. But you have to go through several rounds for this to get filled up, and still finish the one that would get you an opportunity to fight the king, making it more difficult to prepare for this uncommon encounter since you barely get to do it. And this issue has only gotten more exacerbated as they've added more types. I get that the idea is to prevent players from grinding scales too quickly, but why is that an issue when most skill rewards are purely cosmetic or for your locker? Besides that, yeah, this is still an improvement overall, and as an added bonus, it's always open this time. While I've always enjoyed Salmon Run in a shoot the shit with your friends and call kind of way, it's great to be provided new tools with the expectations to use them to play even better now. I just want my eggs, bro. Now Mr. Grizz, on the other hand, doesn't abide by the whole providing for his workers thing. I mean, he's a business owner, it kinda comes with the territory. I understand what I'm about to say may come across as anecdotal, but am I really that crazy when I say that the Salmon Run loadouts are consistently ass in this game? It's to be expected with a random nature like this that you'd occasionally get some bad weapons, but this is a constant thing. Speaking of Grizz, even though his loadouts are trash, he's considerably less rude than before. Like, me and my friends were pointing this out day one, that he lathers more praise on the player than he did in 2, like they twinkified him or something. It's sorta like how Visetti in Animal Crossing got fired for making children and cry because they didn't save their game. We're just not allowed to have mean characters anymore. Although apparently this is more in line with Grizz's demeanor in Splatoon 2's Japanese version. Which I do believe that, but I always like to see this as maybe Grizz did have a change of heart, and despite still being obsessed with taking eggs from a species that probably can't speak, he's actually a good-hearted boss deep down against my better judgment. I think this easily has the potential to be the most flat-out fun game in the series for more reasons other than it just being the shiny brand new one. And for the first few months after launch, I thought it was exactly that. My friends and I grinded out Salmon Run like crazy at the start, and I began to learn how to play well competitively, which in turn helped me come to appreciate some of the nuances behind this game's design that I previously didn't quite see. Here's the thing though. We might be forgetting who made this game. You may remember that Splatoon is kind of the Oppenheimer of Nintendo's finish it later approach.
You are now watching Demolish.
I low-key get embarrassed from even using that phrase, but for those of you living under the world's largest rock, it's Nintendo's common practice with their multiplayer games. Basically, these games have barely any content at launch and gradually get more stuff added to them over the course of a year at best. It really needs no further introduction and discussion beyond that, and obviously I think it fails at helping these lackluster games retain any relevance. With that said, Splatoon always handled it the best out of all of Nintendo's games because that's how content release systems are commonly handled with team shooters. Though I find it insane that Splatoon 1 didn't even have a ranked mode at launch. Can you believe that? But that game had the benefit of being completely brand new. And being on a console with no games, it was definitely lacking, but it did quickly start getting update after update and maintained its freshness. Splatoon 2 had a much more solid launch in comparison and still added plenty of new weapons, new subs and specials, maps, and even a new rank and ranked mode in the form of Clan Blitz. It's not unfair to expect that Splatoon 3 should have a similar level of content at launch and receive updates just as the previous two did. But this time, it was handled differently. The first two games released their updates over the course of a year for the first game and almost 2 for the second, with something being added in every month, with some exceptions as time went on. 3 on the other hand trashed that schedule and introduces a seasonal structure. During each quarter of a year, a new catalog is provided that you can level up by participating in battles and net you new gear or random junk to throw in your locker that'll make your friends question your mental stability. Now, if you've played an online multiplayer game in the past several years, you might be running a lemonade stand right now because it sounds like the dreaded battle pass has wormed its way into a Nintendo game. Difference is that here it's free, as it should be with a $60 game. Not something I should have to praise the company for giving us, but you know, I have like no faith in this industry at this point. Issue is that the rest of the new content was also released alongside each season. And only the new seasons. The idea is to provide fewer updates that were bigger in scope, which on paper I'm not against at all. But I don't believe they succeeded with that goal whatsoever. The game came out in early September of 2022, and its first content-related update, being Chill Season 2022, was December 1st of the same year. So after almost 3 months of this game being out, the fatigue had to be setting in for a lot of the more casual player base, and maybe even the competitive side as well. You've been grinding the same handful of maps and fighting so many sloshing machines online that it's about time we get some new stuff to shake things up. This update brought 3 new weapons and 10 new kits for existing ones, as well as 2 new stages. In terms of things that you can interact with, that's really about it. If you were like me and mainly cared about booting this game up to get in some splat zones or tower control, because we all know I'd sacrifice my firstborn if it meant never playing Rainmaker again, this is what the game was hinging on to freshen itself up until March of 2023.
Oh god. Oh no.
Okay, so that brought 11 more weapon kits, and another 2 maps. June was 2 new weapon types, 9 variants, and hey, would you look at that? My main finally got a new kit, and it only took 9 months! September 2023, on the verge of this game's anniversary, 2 weapon types, 8 variants, and one of those is finally getting the second kit for the Tri-Stringer. We're eating good tonight, fellas. Like, I'm sorry, was it that bad before? This persisted until June of 2024, which was the last season to bring new weapons or stages. From what I've gathered, and correct me if I miscounted, this ended with 73 new weapons, both new and alternative kits, 12 stages, not all of which were original by the way, and there were 2 new King Salmonids in Salmon Run along with new maps for that mode, and even the Big Run events. That was all released over the course of a little less than 2 years or so. Splatoon 2 had roughly the same period of time between its first and last update and got 90 weapons, 15 stages, not including Shifty Station due to availability, and Clam Blitz as a new mode. 2 ended up giving us more content by the end, and in all fairness, what 3 gave us is not a bad number by comparison. But 3 is completely lacking in third weapon kits. Back to my Splatana example, if you play Stamper, then you were stuck with the base kit for about a year, and even then, when you finally got another kit, it's considerably worse than the base. This inconsistent quality in kits is a persistent issue throughout this game's lifespan. I really didn't want to talk about this, but it's kinda hard to ignore. It's inevitable when talking about a competitive game to say that, yeah, the balance is hot garbage, so I'm not gonna say that. What I will say though is that there's very clearly some bias going on with some of these weapon kits. Now I'm not gonna write off all of these as bad just because they don't all follow the bomb plus Trizuka shooter archetype, but some of these are blatantly the meta picks for their season, and there's a whole lot of junk in between that no matter how much Shoten tries to cope about how there's an actual playstyle behind these things, there's no getting around how trash the synergy behind some of these weapon and kit combos are. Then they add an alternative kit for a shooter and give it exactly what it needs to succeed, so all this other stuff you waited 3 months for them to add barely matters when you hop on Splat Zones and every opposing team comp is just the flavor of the seasoned shooter. Does every new weapon they add have to be good? No. Is every shooter good? No, of course not. And there are plenty of other weapon types represented online. There will always be an audience for unviable options or low-tier picks, because some people just want to have fun, and sometimes people work better with lower-tier picks that are considered to have odd playstyles in favor of the top tiers that have more standard ones. It doesn't matter how hard you try, there will always be a meta in any game like this. So the best option is to accept that there will be top tiers and try to balance everything else and bring them up to snuff. But a lot of the time, it didn't even feel like the devs were trying and just threw whatever subs and specials on random ass weapons in the latest patch and then designing 1 or 2 of them with the intention of them being the new meta picks for the season. And that's the thing, it's not so bad now that all of the weapons are available, but when these updates were still coming out, it was a much bigger problem. At launch, Sloshing Machine was considered one of the best weapons in the game, so you'd see that everywhere along with basic stuff like the splatter shot. Next update, it was the custom because it had a bomb and triple ink strike. This was the same patch that added new variants like Big Swig and Nova, but these are both infamously underwhelming, so anyone who played them saw how ineffective they were and immediately dropped them in favor of what was good. It was cool to see them get played, and I always welcomed having a Nova on my team, but that's the thing. That was a very, very rare occurrence. You could say that's just how ranked is, and if I have a problem with it, then I should go back to Turf War where nobody cares. But Turf War lacks the edge that the ranked modes have, and viability in that mode is determined surely based off of how much you can paint. I'm fine with a meta existing. My issue is that the devs were doing nothing to make it not as boring as possible and gutting brand new unique weapons before they get a chance to even hit the ground. Well, I waited 3 months for this game to get fresh again. I guess I get to wait another 3 months at another shot. Yay! Also, I love how it took 3 games and 7 years to let us skip the news, which means there'll probably be another 10 before we can have more than 2 maps on rotation at once. So on top of matches already feeling redundant every season, there's still a 50-50 chance you could be replaying the same map in a session over and over and over again like it's Groundhog Day. I have seen hell, and contrary to popular belief, it's actually called Wahoo World, and I keep having to play on it. Why the fuck did they bring this map back? I'm not gonna claim to be the biggest expert on map design and shooters, but even I recognize there's something wrong with the stages here. Too many of these maps consist of corridors tighter than Fat Albert's pants, begging for team shootouts to be solved with a stray Booyah Bomb or some other crowd-controlling special. For any mode that isn't something like Splat Zones where everyone is focused near the center, large portions of high-level games hard focus on these choke points. And that's odd to say when this is a game with good maneuverability options that refuses to offer good alternative routes or walls to ink. There are exceptions to this rule, like Hagglefish Market, which has a flank route each team can take, and a rewarding spot atop this tent for anchors like Chargers and Splatlings to hang out on, with the caveat that it can't be inked. This is partially why I feel like Clam Blitz and Splat Zones can be the best ranked modes. Because in Zones, you can hold the middle and make a risky but rewarding play by pushing the enemy team further back into their base at the cost of making yourself more vulnerable. And Clam Blitz, where until somebody has crafted a ball, every individual member of each team is trying to cover as much ground as they can to gather clams and make the first field push. Again, Again, I'm not the best at critiquing this sort of stuff, but even I can tell that more options can be provided in terms of map traversal to broaden the variety of shootouts, and it's sad to see how much missed potential there is in this regard in a game that has all of the mechanics present to make for interesting encounters. When you get stuck on one of the more egregious maps for a rotation, it's genuinely the worst feeling ever. Not helping the online experience is the online itself. Yeah, Switch Online is bad. Fork found in kitchen. Don't know if I'm crazy though, but from my experience, and well, from a lot of others as well, Splatoon 3 probably suffers the worst from Nintendo's online infrastructure. Connection issues run rampant in this game, even in comparison to the other two, and infamous cases like Smash Bros. It's genuinely a divine sign that God loves you if you can survive one session without some sort of disconnect, whether it's you or an opponent. I deadass had a disconnect on my very first game, and then the game has the gall to say, "Whew, so that's what battles are like." It was trying to warn me. And for your information, I typically don't have connection issues with games, and most of this footage you're seeing here is me playing with an Ethernet adapter plugged in. I come from Elite Smash. I know this song and dance, bro. Well, I don't know, it's not that bad for me. Well, that's good for you, but it's not that bad. It's not that bad, man. No, it's pretty bad. I think it's fine. Maybe you should check your connection. Okay, but people have actually looked into Nintendo's Wi-Fi services, and reports show they're objectively bad. Works okay for me, though. I guess I don't need to tell you at this point, but Nintendo Switch Online, and especially whatever meat grinder this game got tossed in, is completely indefensible. This is worse than usual, and it's honestly kind of insulting that they still sell this as a feature when really it's just a privilege. Like how owning a dilapidated home is a privilege. Except the rent used to be free. Oh, and also something that's really funny is that both League and X-Rank, things in Splatoon 2, weren't in 3 at launch. Okay, I guess it's not really a big deal since Anarchy Open is this game's equivalent to League, and the actual League has turned into this clown baby mode that nobody cares about. And X-Rank, which I got to play for the first time in this game, is actually pretty... Sorry to turn into a complete negative Nancy there, but all of these issues compounded onto each other to turn what was an admittedly good foundation into a mess of repetitive matches and meta, drip-fed content, and bad online, which I get the latter two are kind of a staple of Nintendo's brand at this point, but it was never this bad with Splatoon. I can usually love games in spite of their issues, but when you're asking me to get past all of that while the game is actively getting updated, yet almost nothing is being done to address these problems, it makes it hard for me to speak positively about this game that I still like. It's one of Nintendo's better post-2020 outings, but even if that core gameplay was fun, I couldn't take it anymore, really. I saw the writing on the wall, and me and the rest of my friends dipped for greater, less frustrating pastures, and I've never been so upset at seeing a game get kneecapped this bad. I'm not the only one like this, because I see several people online, fans of the series no less, who feel the exact same way that I did. A lot of things changed, and I'm all for it, but some of it was for the worse, and some of these growing pains are too painful to be put up with. So, Splatoon 3 kinda sat in limbo for me for a long time, and no amount of the 18 billion Splatfests they did were enough to bring me back. I'm not writing for Big Man that bad. And obviously Shiver was gonna win most of them anyways, surely because people agreed with her correct and insightful opinions on each matter. Every now and then I had to forcefully boot it up for some footage or when the DLC came out, but those were short blips that really didn't do anything to change my mood on this game for the longest time. I always had plans to make a video on this game since I've talked about the others already, but the passion to actually work on this, even if I had some strong feelings to express, wasn't there. For a long time anyway. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk about a completely different side of this game that's always lived rent-free in my head. Splatoon has kind of become a little brother to Kirby, where half of what I look forward to when a new one comes out is uncovering the demented lore in a game otherwise made for literal children. I mean, what can I say? I have my priorities straight. Underneath its colorful exterior, Splatoon operates in a post-apocalyptic world in which, after living through countless natural disasters, humanity has gone mostly extinct. Up until this game, there have only been vague allusions to the influence of human beings in this world, that is, until now, where we set foot on their turf. Alterna, serving as the main setting for the story mode and as humanity's last resort, offers up a much more controlled atmosphere in comparison to what's seen outside in the prologue. I saw this as a representation of order to contrast the chaos that's seen outside, even if the intent was for side order to represent that ideology. Wait. Are you kidding me? It's a secure environment inside a deep cave system with liquid crystals lining the ceiling to replicate the desires of the remaining humans formerly populating the place. But as the logs you retrieve throughout the main story indicate, this was also their final resting place. The last survivors, desperate to reclaim what was left of their home, built a rocket to escape the caverns of Alterna and reach what was out on the surface. However, a test launch backfired and caused a cave-in, resulting in casualties for the remainder of the human race, which, I'll just say, probably left them kinda disappointed. Yet the loss of this species kickstarted a new beginning for the sea creatures in the domain. Coming into contact with the crystals that fell into the water during the collapse of Alterna, this sparked the evolution of what would later become the Inklings and Octarians, giving us the answer as to what shaped the world we see now. The story doesn't end there, though, because it seems as if Alterna is under new management. From someone who knows a thing or two about management, no less. So after several years of questioning his motives behind the operation of Salmon Run, seeing Mr. Grizz unveiled as the antagonist of the game was a bombshell I never would have believed they actually would have gone through with. Mr. Grizz is a bad guy? Who could have seen this coming? They're bringing back Salmon Run in Splatoon 3, so I'd like to think we're going to see Grizz again. I think it'd be interesting to see him get some more development. Some have even brought up the possibility of him taking on an antagonistic role, but we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, look, everyone was talking about how Grizz could be evil, but that thought process only came about because of vague hints given by devs through promotional material, and theory crafting akin to the likes of the stuff you'd find from 2011 YouTube. Seeing him actually play out an antagonistic role was unbelievable, though it was his motivation that got me more curious than anything, and you wouldn't find out the full scope of that from what's said in the main story by itself. Mr. Grizz, since inception, has been represented by this bear carving, leading to debate about his true appearance for many years and why he'd put on the persona of a mammal. To the shock of everyone, it turns out that he really was a bear the whole time. As a last resort by the people of Alterna, the remaining animals were placed on a spaceship known as the Arc Polaris and sent into space in hopes of coming across a new planet to inhabit. The ship never made it though, and ran out of fuel before it could return home, drifting in space for thousands of years until it was eventually pulled back into the Earth's gravitational pull. A lone bear, labeled Bear 3, a very badass name, survived the ensuing crash and woke up from Cairo sleep to find the planet had completely changed following the evolution of the sea creatures. And worst of all, there were no other mammals to be found. Finding his way back to Alterna, Bear 3 had gained intelligence throughout his cryosleep and began experimenting with the crystals shown about the cavern, creating a substance known as fuzzy ooze that had the power to turn any creature into a mammal. In order to create more though, he needed another power source in the form of golden eggs, and founded Grizzco and adopted the name of Mr. Grizz, under the guise of this being a normal harvesting job, when really it was an elaborate scheme that would end in blasting the rocket full of the ooze into space, blowing it up, and covering the whole planet in the ooze. In his eyes, restoring balance back in favor of the mammals, when really he's just doing the Splatoon equivalent of whitewashing the entire planet. It's a plot twist 5 years in the making, and as fucked up as it is, I don't love this twist just because it's shocking or exciting to see a character you've known having been working against you this entire time. Even before I learned of the full story, there was something melancholic about this whole final sequence that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it only became more somber as the pieces started to come together. Grizz is the last of his kind, and in that loneliness and disillusion that came from seeing a monumental shift in nature, thought that the answer to solve that was by forcefully submitting the new generation into fitting what's essentially a false recreation of the old one. Failing to realize that it's not like he was unwanted here. The whole series has been building up to this point where everyone now has a place in society. We've got a manta ray running the news, and even DJ Octavio's chill and doesn't make it his whole personality. I know he's literally a CEO, but everyone would have still accepted Mr. Grizz for who he is if he just stopped giving us such bad weapon loadouts. Time is not kind to our world, and some will not survive the passage of it. Humanity died out due to this, and their failed attempts to recapture their old life. but something new came about in its wake. So is it right to not let go of the past when it comes at the expense of the future? A future made up of people who are happy living just the way they are? Mr. Grizz is probably one of my favorite Nintendo villains. He's always been a funny yet intimidating figure, but this new somber and thematically cohesive angle to his character has cemented him as a truly great antagonist that I unfortunately don't see much discussion of online. Perhaps that's due to the primary talking points of a game like this not being the story mode, because let's face it, nobody buys these games for that. I, though, will always appreciate that level of thought put into storytelling no matter what game. And they thought ahead too. The ruins of Arc Polaris is a stage in Splatoon 2's Salmon Run. Not in this game for some reason though, which I imagine might be because it's a little traumatic for Grizz to look back on. But yeah, cool ass villain, and while I have no idea where they could possibly go from here if a fourth game happens, which, like, obviously it will, all I can say is that Little Judd has big shoes to fill in more ways than one. Oh yeah, the rest of story mode's fine. It's better than the other two, but not as good as Octo Expansion. It's more like a diet version of that, even including a really long, intense final level that actually is quite fun. And I know people make fun of Splatoon music all the time because I'm gurgling piss, but damn, that rocket theme is so... Man, that's good. Most of the soundtrack is in one ear, out the other for me, but I think they did a good job on all of the single-player tracks. Okay, so unscripted soundtrack ramble over, let's talk about the other side of single-player content, which comes in the form of side order, and I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but I'm not really feeling this one for a multitude of reasons. This mode sees the return of Off the Hook, comprised of Pearl, Marina, and Agent 8, who formerly starred in Splatoon 2's Octo Expansion DLC. Sucked into a world known as the Order Sector, created by Marina to reverse the effects of sanitization seen in said other DLC, things sorta went out of control, or I guess in this case under tighter control because of an AI Marina had created known as Order, who wants to... I mean, with a name like that, I hope I don't have to tell you what he wants to do. Accompanying the trio is the until now unseen Act, or Deadfish, who you may know them as one of the series' in-universe composers. You can blame them for this one. Together, the group, and by that I mainly mean Ape, and Pearl's there too I guess, are tasked with climbing the ever-changing tower and confronting Order at the top. So this is a roguelite mode where you pick a weapon, or in this case pellet, and ascend the tower in hopes of reaching the peak. You can choose between multiple objectives between each floor, with each one granting a different color chip that gives you a statistical bonus you keep for the rest of the run, including ink efficiency, damage multipliers, different subs and specials for Pearl to use with her drone to back you up, and even stuff like piercing or homing shots. Yeah, it's a snowball effect that slowly builds until you're near the end of the run, and depending on the weapon you choose, you can rip and tear provided you don't get a bad map and objective that feels specifically designed to be borderline impossible to make any sort of progress in. Back on those maps, they can vary in terms of goals and difficulty, ranging from just destroying some ball-shaped spawners on the map, chasing down these guys who recognize you as a Splatoon player and react accordingly, or claiming a splat zone for a certain amount of time. The harder a floor is, the better the Mimbucks payout is, which in turn can buy you alternate sub and special weapons or chips when you encounter a vending machine. After finishing a run, be it through being not bad at the game or otherwise dying, you'll be rewarded pearls depending on your performance and can be spent to give yourself a permanent boost on all future runs, through increasing your life count, granting guaranteed vending machines on certain floors, boosting your defense, etc. That sounds like a pretty massive boon, and to be honest, it is. For a roguelike mode, a genre I consider to be pretty tough difficulty-wise, this is extremely forgiving, almost to a fault with the sheer amount of safety nets you can buy yourself, if you even need them to begin with, because I actually beat this on my very first attempt, despite what my Elgato recording would have you believe, and from that day forward, I became fully committed to OBS. Now, there are alternative palettes you unlock as you play the mode, but again, it only gets easier with each run, and sure, there's an incentive to play with less modifiers on as you get less pearls the more that are active, but those additional pearls just get you more modifiers, and some junk for your locker, I suppose. What it can't offer in difficulty isn't made up for in content either. You will see the same layouts over and over again, because there's not a lot to begin with. Worse than that is that every 10 floors there's a boss, with Order being at the end on floor 30 every time. The other two intervals are chosen at random from a pool of 3, so every time you replay this, there will be at least one repeat boss from your previous run, And that's ignoring that Order is a repeat boss himself. I like these bosses, don't get me wrong, especially with how quickly you can shred through Rondo and the parallel cannon, with the soundtrack backing it, accentuating the frantic scramble between you and the army of clones. There's only so many times I can bounce this ball though before it gets old. I mean, I would have taken Dark Big Man. I mean, I want to play more Mario Sunshine, dude. And like I said, every final battle is against Order, which even with different weapons, I feel like the fight plays out the exact same every time. And in order to... Shut up. In order to see everything of the very scant offerings of this DLC, you have to fight him again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Sure, it's fun to go on a bit of a power trip every so often with some of these loadouts, but that does little to remedy how much I feel like my time is deliberately being wasted on a piece of DLC that costs more than other roguelites, most of which are on the Switch as well, and give back more than what this does. And no, giving you reused hub areas to swap out Splatsville with doesn't make it worth the extra 5 bones this costs in comparison to Octo Expansion. I didn't touch on it because frankly I didn't care to, but the main game worked off of the formula Octo Expansion established, albeit with a slightly lower difficulty as to not alienate its more casual audience. It's not the greatest thing in the world, and I have no intention on going back and replaying it, but while I respect the intent to try and do something cool and new with the game's mechanics, I feel like in comparison to the main story, they didn't go the full mile with it. If you're going to make a mode that hinges on random events and replayability, give me enough to where I don't feel like I've seen everything by the time I've done a third of the pallets you want me to clear. There is one interesting wrench thrown in by the end when you get 8's pallet. It's a normal octo shot with the catch that the more of Marina's hacks you have active, the less room there is to fit in chips. It's a cool restriction to work around, and you have to determine what hacks you can get by without for the sake of making this admittedly sluggish and not good weapon into something workable. But that's only one part in an otherwise disappointingly shallow DLC. And there's a reason I haven't really touched on anything story-wise, because I don't have anything to say. Sorry, but Off the Hook was a little more fleshed out in Octo Expansion, and by now there's not a whole lot you can do with these two. If you like seeing the snow and the snowplow again because you're a hyper fan who just loves seeing these two, then more power to you, but that's not really my thing, and no amount of flavor text will change my mind. Same applies to Act, unfortunately, who's really cool to see in the flesh, but let's be honest, this is fan service. I like them and all, chill personality, and I'd rather have them here than not, but there's hardly any attention given to them aside from these extra messages you get upon clearing all of the pallets that detail their relation with Marina. Needless to say, I was let down by Side Order in numerous ways, but a lot of other people like it and got more out of it than I did. So, I get it. Not everything's for me, and not every facet of this game's story has to be a horrific revelation that shakes up the core of this world I care about for some reason. But I don't think the impact it left will be felt as much as the likes of Octo Expansion even now, and in a time where I was still upset about the state of the game, this didn't do anything to alleviate my irks with it. So if you couldn't tell by the way I'm talking about it now, I had pretty mixed feelings about this game overall, and there was a long period of time where my socks were firmly on. I always thought it was a great game buried underneath a multitude of issues that prevented it from spreading its wings, and that it was ultimately not really worth playing anymore because of that. But last September, they held the final Splatfest for this game, and I was conflicted. I worked all weekend and knew I'd be dedicating my little free time to this if I rounded up all my friends to play with me, and I'd have to submit myself to more tricolor battles. It sounded like a real bad deal for me. However, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I still had some interest in making this video, so I begrudgingly booted this game up again with my friends, and we had fun. I've never been a huge Splatfest fan because it's really just grinding out turf war for hours at a time, but I rarely ever gathered up a whole group of friends to participate with me until this one. Obviously, after not having touched the game in so long, I was washed, but who cares? It was a great excuse to see some cool sights we'd never see again, and just talk while playing a game that we all apparently can't stand. And even though our team, being Team Present, was completely robbed by nostalgia-blind fools, we kept playing after this. I got my friends to try out some Anarchy Open with me, and playing like a leader and communicating with your allies like you're a true squad for the first time in so long provided me some much needed clarity. The answer that would go on to quell my miserable outlook on this game. And it was right in front of my eyes this entire time. Don't play solo queue. That was definitely one of the hardest tests I think we've suffered.
Simply bad game. Well, I'll go, baby. It's okay.
That doesn't make me feel any better. That sounds like a joke, but I mean, while it doesn't solve everything, when you're with people you like, it makes experiences like this even better. And that's on top of coming back well after every weapon got added, so it really was like a fresh new game to all of us. We continually played this just to hang out with each other, and gradually got better, and even though I've played Splatoon with my friends before, it was never to this extent. Growing up, I kept to myself a lot and never had a lot of friends, to the point where I didn't get to play Splatoon 1 with anyone aside from myself. Splatoon 2, I was more active online and had more opportunities to play with new friends I'd made through Discord, but it was still a bit of a rare occurrence for me. At launch, Splatoon 3 was what I had hoped for all this time. I had a larger core group to hang out with, and we grinded this like mad on launch day. It's unfortunate though that those problems drove us away from it. With me sticking around the longest, I was the only one playing now. I don't want to get too personal here, but around the time this game came out, I was beginning to get disconnected from my personal relationships, those that were offline. So with that outlet fading away and the only game I cared about at the time having its worst issues surface with nobody else to share them with, I felt pretty lonely and upset that Splatoon 3 couldn't be better. I sort of pushed my own personal grievances onto it, because I didn't feel this way when I played the other two, did I? Sure, I was playing better than I ever did before, but I don't feel like that matters when there's nobody there to share it with. To clarify, I've always been with my online friend group, and we haven't been completely torn apart yet, but all of them had the same issues here I did, and were quicker to drop it. In coming back to celebrate not just what this game did manage to accomplish in spite of it all, and well, celebrating everything the series has achieved in its lifespan, as this would be the last outing it'd have during this console generation, I think we all gained a newfound respect for what it did do right. We just needed the right people to help us figure that out. Sure, maybe I didn't think it was as great of an experience as the other games, but I'm also not the same as who I was 10 years ago either. I was 13 when Splatoon 1 came out, 15 at the time of 2, 20 with 3, and I'm 22 now and almost 23. I am sad at the things I lost in that time, and I do think the present could be better, but sometimes when you can look past all of that crap, there can still be a lot of greatness beneath it all. It's hard to excuse a lot of Splatoon 3's problems, but I can't lie, it still gave me memories I'll treasure forever. No matter how much I'll criticize how certain aspects about it could have been less egregiously bad, you can still flourish even if you stumble a lot. This game was a victim of an odd release schedule and strange timing as well, but I can still greatly appreciate what it did do. And my overall experience with it was kinda poetic considering what it does have to say about the passage of time. I'm not a kid anymore, yet I know I can still look forward to the future. It may have taken about 2 years to get that message across, but I'm happy that it did. So, thank you, you stupid, stupid Squid Game.